Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am going to discuss to you the introduction to probability. For our learning objectives, number 1, define probability. Number 2, analyze and solve problems involving probability. Number 3, apply probability in the real life situations. Now, what is probability? Have you ever heard these phrases? There is a 60% chance of rain today. What is Tim's chance of winning the game tonight? Candidate Jasmine has a 45% chance of winning the election over candidate Romeo. Surprises similar to these are common in a student's world of experiences. The media is constantly using predictors, and it is important that students learn how these numbers are determined. The use of probability experiments is an important step in beginning the process of understanding how these numbers are determined. Therefore, probability is the branch of mathematics concerning numerical descriptions of how likely an event is to occur, or how likely it is that a proposition is true. So the key word for the probability is chances. Let us do an experiment. So we have to use a 25 cent and 1 peso coin. In this experiment, you will flip both coins and record the results. The two possible outcomes on a 25-cent coin are heads and tails. So kapag finlip mo yung 25 centavos na coin, ang chance lang na pwede lumabas ay isang heads or isang tails. So the two possible outcomes on the 1 peso coin are also heads and tails. So what would be the outcome if we flip the two coins together? So kapag dalawa na yung coins na finlip natin, ano na yung mga possible outcome na lumabas? So we have to do that experiment. So make a chart, flip a 25-cent coin, then 1 peso coin. Do not catch the coins. Record your result on the chart. Continue to flip the coins until you have completed the 10 flips and recorded the results. After you have completed this experiment, how many possible outcomes are there? So ano-ano ba yung lumabas na outcome dun sa ginawa nating experiment? There are four possible outcomes which are heads, heads. So, pwedeng heads ng 25 cent, heads ng 1 peso coin. So, may lumabas na ganyang result kanina. Then, heads, tails. So, heads ng 25 cent and tails ng 1 peso coin. Then, tail, heads. So, tail ng 25 cents and heads ng 1 peso coin. Then, we also have tails, tails. So, the tails of the two coins. So, we can write this into our chart. Okay. So, this heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, and tails, tails. These are called sample space. So, by definition, a sample space is the set of all possible outcomes. So, these are all the possible outcomes when we flip two coins together. The sample space for the experiment of flipping coin is heads, tails. So, kapag nag-flip ka lang ng isang coin, ang sample space lang nalalabas ay isang heads at isang tails. But since we use two coins, we have heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, and tails, tails. So, sa una nating pag-flip ng dalawang coin hanggang sa 10, lalagyan natin siya ng star to indicate kung ano yung lumabas. Ayan. So, the first flip, heads, heads. The second flip, heads, tails. The third flip, heads, tails ulit. Fourth flip, heads, heads. Fifth flip, tails, tails. Sixth flip, tails, heads. Seventh flip, tails, heads. Eighth flip, tails, heads. Ninth flip, heads, tails. Tenth flip, we have heads, tails. Now, what is the probability of getting heads, heads? Ano yung probability or ano yung chance na heads, heads ang lalabas? So, how do we compute that question? So, the probability of an event is the ratio of the total number of ways you can get that outcome to the total of outcomes. So, with formula, we have probability is equal to number of favorable outcomes over total number of possible outcomes. So, in our example, or the question number 1, what is the probability of getting heads? Heads. So, our favorable outcome is heads, heads. So, there is only one heads, heads na lalabas. So, 1. Then, our denominator, total numbers of possible outcomes, which is heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, tails, tails. So, there are 4 total numbers of possible outcomes. So, we will write 4 in the denominator. So, therefore, our answer is 1/4. So, 1/4 is the probability that we get heads, heads by flipping the two coins together. Next question. What is the probability of getting heads, tails, or tails, heads? So, for our formula, probability is equal to the number of favorable outcomes over total numbers of possible outcomes. Since we have two favorable outcomes, which is heads, tails, or tails, heads, we will write 2 in the numerator. Then our total numbers of possible outcomes is 4. Then we can simplify 2/4, which is 1/2. So the probability of getting heads, tails, or tail, heads is 1/2. Next, what is the probability that both coins will be the same? So, ano ba yung sample space dito na same yung dalawang coins? So, we have heads, heads, and tails, tails. So, we have two favorable outcomes. So, two favorable outcomes. So, we will write 2 over 4. Then, simplify, we have 1/2. So, the probability of getting both coins will be the same is 1/2. What is the probability that only one coin will be heads? So, only one coin will be heads. So, we have heads, tails, tails, heads. So, the number of favorable outcomes we have is 2. then our total numbers of possible outcomes is 4. So simplify, we have 1/2. What is the probability that neither coin will be heads? Neither coin will be heads. So we only have tail, tail. Walang lumabas na heads sa tail, tail. So for our formula, our number of favorable outcomes is only 1, which is tail, tail. And total numbers of possible outcomes is 4. So therefore, this is the probability. What is the probability that at least one coin will be tails? So, a word is at least. So, ang pinakabababa ay isa. Isang tail or pwedeng dalawang tail. So, maghanap ka ng mayroong isang tail. So, we have heads, tails, tails, heads, or we have tails, tails. So, the number of favorable outcomes is 3. The total numbers of possible outcomes is 4. Therefore, the probability is 3/4. What is the probability of getting tails, heads? So the number of favorable outcomes is 1 because we only have tails, heads here. So total number of possible outcomes is 4. So the probability is 1/4. Next, what is the probability of getting tails, tails? So number of favorable outcomes is 1. So this is 1. Total numbers of possible outcomes is 4. So we have 1/4. That's all. Thank you for listening.